Hey everyone, it's Meg. I know you guys were really hoping that I would rap for you today, but instead I'm going to be going over WriteUp 1. Feel free to post on Piazza with any questions that you have about my solution. Hopefully they were somewhat similar to yours, and good luck on WriteUp 2. So since this was the first WriteUp, I'm going to go over a few things that will be second nature to you by the end of the semester, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page might be worthwhile going over right now. So if you head over to this left-hand side, when you type in the script, all you'll have is just this WriteUp folder with a source folder, a code package, and a test package. You didn't have to write any tests this week. You only had to write one method. So if you open up this code package and click on WriteUp, it'll open up what I already had opened, this public class WriteUp. And this is the method that you were supposed to complete. Right now it's just a method stub. It has a return type, a single parameter, and it's just returning null. So once you're at this point, you can go ahead and read the method, or read the problem statement, and go about your approach. So this week we were asked to define a method so that it returns a new string which contains all the characters from input that are at an even index input, none of the characters that are at an odd index. So at that point, I'm pretty confident with what this needs to do. I'm thinking that it needs to return every other character, and it needs to return them if it's at an odd index. But if I think back to indexing, I know that indexing starts at 0. So then I might get a little confused and think, hey, well, is 0 an odd or an even index? It's not an odd or an even number. I don't know. So that's when this nifty example comes into play. So he gives us this example with an input string LASJDFK, and it has to return LSDK. So if I look at my example, I see that he starts at index 0, then returns, then adds every other character from 0 to that new output string. So the index at 2, or the index at 0, L, the index at 2, S, the index at 4, D, and the index at 6, K. So we want to return every other index starting from 0, and then the continuing even numbers. So now I can look at my method and decide how I want to approach this. So the fact that I'm returning a string, and it's different than the string that I'm passing in as a parameter, makes me think that I'm going to need a return string or some sort of new string to pass in characters to. So I'm going to declare a variable, a string variable. I'm going to just call it S. And I'm just going to set it equal to an empty string, or assign it to an empty string. So now I know that I need to iterate through this input string. And the best way for me to do that would be to use a for loop. So if we look back up at our example, I want to iterate through this string LASJDFK, and I want to return every other letter. So I'm going to start my indexing at 0 because I know that I care about that 0th index. Int I equals 0. And I want to keep going until I is greater than or equal to the length of my string, because then I'm past my highest index. So while I is less than input.length. A lot of times we blindly write I++ here, but if we really think about this problem, we don't care about every index. So I don't want to just say I++ and then check if my index is odd and then check if my index is 0, because that's just extra work that's not really necessary. So what I can do here instead is just increment my index by 2 instead of 1, because then I'm looking at index 2 and then index 4 and then index 6, and I'm just skipping over the ones that I don't care about. So I equals I plus 2. So now I can add the character that I'm currently at to my new string. So I can take S and assign it to S plus input.char at I. Chat at char at. Yeah, and then instead of returning null, I want to make sure that I am returning the correct string s. So now if you're fairly confident in your answer, you could just run your tests. If they all pass, you're most likely good. But a lot of times, to help your understanding of the problem, it's good to run over the example and make sure that you understand why the code is doing what it's doing. So let's do that really quickly. I'm going to make some notes up here because that's helpful. So we have public string solution, string input is our parameter. So let's say that our input is this example that Dr. Alphonse gave us. We start with this empty string s. So I'm going to keep track of what that is at every step in my for loop. And at the same time, I want to keep track of what I is. And then I also want to be aware that input.length is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the length of this string. So there's 7 characters here, so input.length is equal to 7. So I is equal to 0 in our first step. And it's still less than input.length, and we haven't added 2 to it yet. So we enter our for loop, and we assign s to be equal to s plus input.char at I. So s started out as an empty string. But then after we add input.char at 0, because I is 0, we end up with L. So now we add 2 to I. So I is now equal to 2, and it's still less than 7. So then our second index is s, so we can add s to our string. And then continue doing this until we get I to be greater than input.length. So now I is equal to 4, because we added 2 to it. We look at the fourth index, that is D. Then we add 2 again, we get 6. 6 is still less than 7, that is K. And then we can add K to our string. So now the next time that we add 2, we end up with 8. But 8 is greater than 7, so we would exit this for loop and then return s. And s returned exactly what we wanted it to. So we look like we're doing pretty well. So now what you want to do is think about corner cases and convince yourself of why this would work for even length strings, odd length strings, an empty string, etc. And think about all the different possibilities of input that you could have and make sure that it's still going to return what you want it to. Once you have convinced yourself of this sort of situation, the method that we wrote will automatically take care of those specific corner cases. There's nothing really too tricky on this write-up. But once you've convinced yourself that your solution is pretty correct, you can save your work and then run your tests. So we'll run as JUnit test, and I see that all my tests pass. So I am looking good. So that was the solution to this week's write-up. As you can see, it related to the practice problems pretty well. Make sure that you are practicing and doing problem set 2 so that you're prepared for write-up 2 next week. Have a good weekend.